Welcome back, and now in this companion video to the one you just watched, we're now going to turn to Chapter 8 and talk about the figure of Dionysus. Don't forget for your form assignments to answer at least one discussion question for both Chapter 7 and for Chapter 8. Make sure you submit that in the form and then also provide a response to one of the other students' responses as well. Okay, so now for Dionysus. I'd like you, in the Harris-Platzner textbook now, once again to pause the video and turn to page 249. The picture that you should see is this one, which is one that shows you the inside of a Greek bowl. It shows a ship that's surrounded by dolphins. Okay, so please pause your video and open to page 249, this picture. Okay, you all set? So Dionysus, as we said, is the polar opposite of Apollo. Now, interestingly, Dionysus did sometimes spend some time at the Delphic Oracle of Apollo when Apollo was away on vacation. He went up north to the Hyperboreans, way up in the northern part of the Greek world, and Dionysus would hold his seat for a short time. One wonders what went on with the Greek oracle during that period, because Dionysus is not the orderly type that Apollo would be. Instead, Dionysus is total chaos and mania. So let's talk about him. Dionysus undergoes a very troublesome birth, as we talked about it back with Chapter 1. According to different versions, he, first of all, was consumed in a fireball when Semele, his mother, at the instigation of Hera, again, insisted that Zeus revealed himself in his true form. Zeus was compelled to do so, and when he revealed himself in his true form, it was a fireball, and it consumed Semele. And thereby Dionysus was caught in the fireball, not yet born. So Zeus rescues Dionysus' remains and plants them into his thigh, and that's again is an explanation for why Dionysus is so carnal, being born out of the body of Zeus. Hera, however, teams up with the Titans and has Dionysus torn limb from limb by the Titans, whereupon Zeus has to go and rescue Dionysus' heart, and according to some versions, it was his heart that he put into his thigh, and once again Dionysus is born. So as a result of this double or even triple birth that Dionysus goes under, he is really touched in his head. As a matter of fact, the DI part of his name does refer to two, suggesting his dual nature, that he represents both birth and death, that he represents law and order when it suits him, but otherwise chaos and mania at all other times. He's associated, of course, with wine because of its alcoholic nature. He's also associated with the theater because of his ability to disguise himself and change identities, which is what goes on in the theater. You put on a mask and represent yourself as an actor, as somebody other than who you actually are. And Dionysus travels all around the world, being pestered by Hera, being driven mad by her. He rides on the backs of panthers. There's a point where he actually suffers a long year servitude with the Amazonian queen. Her name is Omphale, and so forth. He just goes totally nuts everywhere. And then there's the problem about his birthplace, which is the city Thebes. Unfortunately, Dionysus' family in Thebes, his cousins and uncles and so forth, do not respect him properly. His sister, his aunts, the sisters of his mother, in particular claim that Zeus isn't actually his father, that Zeus is basically a pseudonym for some John that basically Semele had in Thebes. And so Dionysus is even more illegitimate than he would be already just by being born from Zeus. But in any event, it means that Dionysus would not be a divine birth. So Dionysus is so infuriated about this that he goes back to Thebes in Eurypylus' play Bacchae. Not only are his aunts defaming him this way, but also his cousin Pentheus refuses to allow worship of Dionysus in Thebes. What that basically represents is the non-Greek and barbaric aspect of Dionysus's type of worship that essentially is alien to proper Greek morals. That gets to this aspect of chaos that's also going to figure in Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy. So when Dionysus gets back to Thebes, he arranges for his mother Agave, Pentheus' mother Agave, one of Dionysus' own aunts, to become mad and all of the other women of Thebes are also set mad as well. And when Pentheus tries to resist Dionysus's worship by putting in prison this mysterious stranger who is interceding on behalf of Dionysus, but it's actually Dionysus himself in disguise, then that stranger convinces Pentheus to disguise himself in drag and go out in the mountains to watch the women to see what they're really doing out there. Why don't you learn about it before you just go and reject it? And so Pentheus does what he says, because he's actually getting kind of allured by these women, all worked up and going out there and tearing cattle apart. They're so manly and they're so strong, and of course very enticing too. And so he goes out there and he sits on top of a tree. And then Dionysus reveals himself in a beam of light and says to the women, "Go get that man who's spying on you." And they shake him out of the tree and they tear him all up. And it's Agave, his mother, that actually tears off his head, and she thinks that it's a lion that she's caught in a hunt. So that's the nature of the mania. So what Dionysus does is to set Thebes into a state of ecstasy and madness. And the Maenads, in fact, have their name derived from the Greek word mainomai, which, just like the word mania in English, means to be mad, to be out of one's mind. Ecstasy, by the way, in the ancient Greek world means literally standing outside of oneself. So therefore driven mad, because one is just totally disconnected with one's own psychic being. All right, so once Dionysus gets himself reestablished in Greece this way, and of course he's established with civilization, connected with theater and wine and so forth, rather reluctantly both the Greeks and the Olympic pantheon have to accept him into his ranks, and that's how he is established with the Olympic pantheon in a way that replaces Hestia, as we talked about in chapter 6 on the Olympic pantheon. Okay, now, although, of course, wine is the really fun aspect of Dionysus, the one that probably matters the most from the standpoint of mythology is his connection with theater. Because Dionysus, as the theatrical god, first of all, can be worshipped during all of the theatrical festivals, including, most importantly, the City Dionysia festival in Athens. Essentially, while he's worshipped there, the viewers of plays are and also listening to music and so forth, are watching various bards and playwrights essentially watch role changing going on in some form. So there are different stories being depicted with people acting in roles that are outside of their ordinary roles. And frequently, if it's tragedy, there's some kind of disturbance of civilization going on that is a result of hubris, just like Pentheus' hubris in rejecting Dionysus, that is all part of worshiping not only Dionysus the god himself, but also his own very tragic-like birth of being torn all apart. That now forms the basis of Greek tragedy, and it is also related to Greek comedy too. So Dionysus has that appropriate connection with theater. That's what establishes him with civilization that way. But also we have sparagmos. Dionysus himself is physically torn apart, as is Pentheus in Bacchae. And so the idea of being torn apart can be physical, and it can also be mental or emotional, and also with civilization. When Dionysic worship gets underway, people go mad. They lose the bounds of their minds, sometimes even their bodies, and their emotional state. And civilization temporarily breaks down, as in fact happens with Thebes. When the women go totally crazy, then regular civilization like childbearing and weaving and all the domestic tasks that the women normally have to carry out, all of those just break down once the women are not there to keep control of it. So Dionysus can just basically tear apart law and order everywhere he goes, and can physically tear apart people if necessary in order to get his way. So he's astonishingly willful in Euripides' Bacchae. And I had a student some years ago who referred to him as the ultimate kick-ass god. He definitely is that. The prologue of that play is really frightening, seeing this really powerful, angry god storming around on stage saying, "I am going to get this city." It must have been really, really quite a sight to see. And as such, therefore, Dionysus is the one who will disturb the order that is maintained by Apollo, and that's what makes these two polar opposites. So that is what's going on with Dionysus in chapter 8. You might notice at the end of chapter 8 that there is some references to connections between Dionysus and Jesus Christ, because The connection with Dionysus and wine, as well as Demeter with grain, ties in very closely with the Eucharist that is associated with Jesus Christ. And it turns out that many of the stories we have associated with Dionysus also can find their parallels in the New Testament with regards to Jesus Christ. So it is possible that there was some influence of the story of Dionysus in the formation of the story of Jesus Christ. So I'll leave that for you to read on your own. All right, so in the last of these, the series of videos in chapter 7 and 8, we're going to talk a bit now about the birth of tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche, comparing these two figures of Apollo and Dionysus. Okay, so coming back for this last video in this chapter 7-8 series.